Managing a crisis in 12-step recovery. That's this week's topic because I've been personally going through some crisis and I wanted to share with you exactly what I'm doing to use my recovery in order to stay sane through this process. So in this video, you're going to get some examples of exactly what I'm doing that helped me stay calm and be able to handle and manage a crisis without resort to destructive behavior. But first, my name is Michelle Ferris. I'm a psychotherapist and I love how to create relationships that work. So I've had two pretty major family medical issues. One was someone in my family got diagnosed with a brain tumor, very scary. I actually moved them into my home, so they're coming in and out. And then this past weekend, my mom fell, who's elderly, and took quite a bad fall. And so we're now managing that. And it really made me think about my recovery and how important it is. So whether you're in recovery from addiction, codependency, any type of destructive behavior, managing a crisis can be difficult and it can lead to relapse if we don't have the right tools. So the first thing that I did was I stayed in the moment. When I got the news about the brain tumor, when my mom fell, I didn't future trip. I stayed in, okay, what do I need to do right now? Because right now this is heavy and this is big. And staying in the moment does a lot of things. It helps us be where our feet are, which is super important. And it also helps us not future trip and worry about the what ifs. Because in both of these scenarios, I could have majorly went into, oh my God, what does this mean a year from now, 6 months from now? So this was big, but staying in the moment and doing what they say in program is the next right thing is really a great first step. Because the more you can stay grounded during a crisis, the better you're gonna cope. So basically using the slogan, one day at a time, is really fitting here. That one day at a time saying that we all have in 12-step programs and we hear at meetings really kicked in. So if you're in crisis right now, stay in today. You don't have to worry about tomorrow, next week, next month, because if you can live one day, sometimes 1 minute at a time, it really does help. It will decrease your stress. It will help you not future trip and get into panic and fear. Because so easily, if I didn't have the program and these principles, I would have freaked out. And instead, I was really able to stay relatively grounded and be able to do the next right thing and support my family member, which really was important to me. So the next thing I did was I immediately got off my plate anything that wasn't essential. I had to cancel an anger class. I had to not work with clients for a couple of weeks. I cleared anything off my schedule that I could, because when we're in crisis, we are going to need as much of our energy as possible. And when we're in crisis, we usually have some level of shock and denial, and that drains our body. I know for me, when I first got the news, I could feel the blood draining from my body. I was so scared and sad. But that's part of crisis, right? We have a physical reaction to the trauma and we have to allot for that. And how I allotted was I immediately changed my schedule and got rid of everything non-essential. And sometimes you're gonna need help to do that. Sometimes you may need to ask family and friends to help you with that, especially if you have small kids. But if you can clear your plate as much as you possibly can from those volunteer opportunities, any favors that you've already committed that you know you don't have room for, it's really okay to say no right now. It has to be about you and your family member or whatever is involved in your crisis, because that's how you're gonna stay sane during the process. The next thing I had to do is I had to allow time to feel my feelings. And at first, when you're in a crisis, especially if it's something shocking and unexpected, you may not have your feelings right away. I know I didn't. I kind of shut down, not purposely, I just couldn't feel it yet. And it took me a couple of days and I was on the phone with my best friend and immediately as I started talking, it flowed out of me and I was so grateful. Because part of why we need to feel our feelings during a crisis is that our feelings help keep us grounded. And when we use all our energy to suck them down and hold on to them, and it makes it harder to cope. So part of what you need to do is find room to feel your feelings. If you need to cry in your car or in the bathroom, somewhere private if you need privacy, so that you can allow those feelings to flow. Because the other thing is that releases that stress hormone cortisol. So when we cry, we automatically get relief from the stress because we're no longer holding on so tightly to those emotions. And that's really a good sign of your recovery if you can do that. The next thing I did was I practiced surrender. I absolutely knew in that moment that I had no control over the outcome, what was going to happen, even how long I was going to be away. But I just stuck to the next right thing, because practicing surrender, that third step in 12-step recovery, is really powerful, because what it does is it helps us remember what we have control over and where we don't have control. And sometimes, even though we fight that surrender, when there's a crisis and we get to that wall of, wow, I really can't control anything right now, it is completely out of my hands, especially a health issue of a family member, it reminds us the power of surrender, because we don't have power over someone else's health or someone else's behavior. And even though that can be scary, that can also be a comfort, because when I'm in surrender, I know the only thing I can control is my reaction to the crisis. I can't control the outcome or what's going to happen, but that's where staying in the moment really helps me stay grounded. So the next thing I did was I stayed connected to my support system. And this is going to be vital if you go through a crisis, because part of what we do sometimes in 12-step recovery when times get hard is we isolate. And we might practice unhealthy behaviors. Like if we're an alcoholic, we might eat too much, or we might smoke compulsively. And those aren't necessarily the best, but you get to decide what behaviors are going to be acceptable for you during the crisis and what behaviors you don't want to practice in your crisis. Obviously, if you're in addiction recovery, your addiction is going to be super important. So as long as you stay sober from your substance, that's a win. And part of how we do that is staying connected to our support system, even if you have to listen to a meeting on Zoom on the way to the hospital. Today I was on a meeting and I noticed I was way too overwhelmed. I couldn't focus on the speaker. So what I did was I went in the other room, I put the meeting on mute, and I prayed and I had a good cry, and then I could come back and listen to the meeting. Kind of an example of what I'm talking about is that meetings might look different to you right now, depending on your level of overwhelm. You might have to do some of them in the car. You might have to call people more, because that might be an easier way for you to get support. But you really need to stay connected to your support system to avoid isolation and relapse behavior. The next thing I do continuously is that I absolutely do whatever I can to preserve my emotional energy, because during a crisis, our energy is going to be less. We're not going to have the same level of energy as we do when we're not in crisis, because the crisis kind of sucks up our energy. That overwhelm, that fear takes away from our ability to cope. So part of what you need to do is you need to be able to ask yourself, what do you need to do right now to preserve your energy? Now, some of this is going to be taking things off your plate, like I said earlier, but it also might be some healthy comforts. Do you need more time alone? Do you need a little comfort item like I have that I squish sometimes? What do you need? Do you need to sit with your pet? What are those things that really comfort you right now? Because part of being in recovery is we have to shift from unhealthy comforts to healthy comforts. And a crisis is a really important time to know what those healthy comforts are. Now, the next one I do is that I'm really gentle with myself during a crisis, because I know I'm not going to be at my best. I know I'm going to miss things. I may misread an email. I may be late to something because I don't have enough energy, or if I'm in the middle of feeling overwhelmed, I may have to call somebody and say, you know what, I'm going to be late. Because for my own self-care and my own mental health during a crisis, I have to constantly gauge what I need and what I don't need. And being gentle with yourself is really an important aspect of managing a crisis, because nobody manages a crisis perfectly. We're human. We're going to have feelings. But the most important thing is that we show up and we stay present. And By utilizing the tools I'm talking about, you're going to be able to manage a crisis better in your 12-step recovery. So the next step is I'm going to leave a link to my resource library for you because I have a lot of free cheat sheets around anxiety, codependency, self-care, boundaries.